From the center of the universe, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, this is the SDM Show with your host, Rob Cairns. The SDM Show focuses on business, life, productivity, digital marketing, WordPress, and more. Sit back, relax, grab your favorite drink, and enjoy the show. Here is Rob.
Hey, everybody, Rob Cairns here. I'm the founder, CEO, and chief creator of amazing ideas at Stunning Digital Marketing. Today, I have my good friend, Mr. Tim Nash, with me with his monthly security segment. And we're going to talk about what Tim thinks about all these security alerts that you keep receiving in newsletters. For example, 400 plugins have vulnerabilities. So this one you don't want to miss. Sit back, relax, enjoy the show. The SDM Show is brought to you by Stunning Digital Marketing, the digital marketing concierge that helps you put all your marketing pieces together. We are your marketing experts. We are also your WordPress security experts and know how to lock down a website and protect yourself from bad actors. So contact us at Stunning Digital Marketing today. Hey, everybody, Rob Cairns here. Today I'm here with my good old security friend, Mr. Tim Nash. Hey, Tim, how are you?
Hi, I'm doing all right. We're recording late in the evening for me,
Yeah,
and so sort of mid-afternoon for you.
it is.
But you're getting the very low energy, low key vibe for me this evening.
Oh
We'll go for the
God,
chilled pack.
I should have sent you the coffee before we went to record, not after, right?
I
That would
mean,
have.
I've got a cup of tea, which is probably a bad idea after like 5 o'clock. So we can re-record this if you like at 3 in the morning when I'm up with the jitters.
Yeah, I get it. So, we were talking before we went to record, and lately we've seen this big influx of plugin and theme security problems lately. The solid WP list was well over 470 last week, give or take, which I believe is a record for them. Somebody at Solid can hit me over the head if I'm wrong, but I don't think so. Sakuri puts out a list and other things have happened. But before we jump into that, ironically, our poor friend, Mr. Oliver Sid over at PatchStack had an issue this morning. I don't know if you saw it or not, but a security company's X account managed to get hacked today. And I feel for Oliver because you and I both know Oliver, and I don't wish
Yeah.
that on anybody. But how did that happen? I wonder.
Well, I mean, this is the thing where you sort of like going, you should never make fun of somebody else's ill will, and
I'm not.
Schadenfreude will
I
get
am
you
not.
every single time. But yes, there's something particularly ironic when security companies get hacked. And it's the nature of the beast. Everybody, if you can take all the steps in the world, and if something is misconfigured somewhere on the lines, some
Yep.
sort of compliance steps haven't been taken. From the little bit I saw, and I really haven't paid much attention to it other than seeing it and going, oh,
Me
for
too.
them. But from a little bit, it doesn't sound like it was any sort of like session hijacking or anything like that. This was
Nope.
the password had been reset, which implies the person had the password to start with. So they were talking that maybe it was sim jacking, but I was under the impression that most of PatchStack's people who worked at PatchStack were actually based over in the EU. Maybe one of them's in the, and it's not that it's necessarily that much harder to simjack in the EU and Europe than it is in the States, but the mechanisms are a little different, and the telecoms processes are slightly more robust, as I guess we could say. So it seems a bit more surprising that that would be the route in. But of course, it doesn't mean that somebody wasn't just wandering through New York at the wrong time.
Yeah.
But yeah, what an unlucky win.
Yeah, I would agree, and I'm not picking on Oliver. Patchstack's kind of my WordPress security, one of my WordPress security sources of trust. I think his team does a really good job. It's just that when this happens to a security company, people look at it and say, well, you know, and they don't understand the complexities that you and I and Oliver understand on what goes on, right? So,
Yeah, and again, they from as an outsider, from what they've said, they took all the right steps.
yep.
Um, And I mean, that's something that they could take heart on. It also then makes you go, okay, well, if we take all the right steps and this still happens, I mean, I can totally see why some people go, well, why should I bother? Uh,
Yeah. Well,
so
I think
maybe that's
I
just
think
a hint. Time to leave X for or excrement or whatever we're calling it this week.
yeah, depending on the flavor of the day. So today I thought we'd jump into and talk about why we see an increase in vulnerabilities. And you and I were talking, and you said you don't spend a lot of time looking at security lists yourself. How come?
So there was a point in my life where I would every week there was like 4 or 5 lists who I would pay attention to and I would go through
Yeah.
and I would pick out interesting vulnerabilities. I'd mark ones that I thought were important for my clients, and I was like, okay. And over time, I started doing this less and less. Now, part of this is because I have well-trained clients who, on the whole, know that they should be keeping up to date ahead of these vulnerabilities.
Mhm.
Vulnerabilities that are appearing on these reports, in most cases, should be patched and
Yeah.
plugins released. So there are, and SolidOP is actually a good example of a company that does this quite well, where they release how many have been patched versus unpatched. And if I'm going to look at a list, what I'm interested in is the unpatched
Of
list.
course.
I'm interested in the ones that have problems. But it's worth remembering that the vast majority of vulnerabilities, while they are vulnerabilities, they are also just bugs and are not actively necessarily being exploited, and that the risk to the clients varies dramatically. And so when we see something saying there are 481 new vulnerabilities, quite often 400 of these will have been discovered by the same person, and it will be the
Mhm.
same bug that's just replicated through all the plugins in one go.
That's correct.
We often see these big sweeping statements, and when you start looking down in it, and normally when we get things like that, what's being patched is very minor. The other problem we have with these sort of vulnerability reports is they often rely on CVSS scores,
Mhm.
which are a pile of they're just pointless.
Yeah.
The risk analysis that's done not by the vulnerability researchers themselves, they're doing the correct analysis according to our agreed standard. It's just our agreed standard when it comes to working with web applications sucks.
Yeah.
And it massively overemphasizes the fact that the issues can be done over a network. And you're like, well, duh, it's a website.
Yeah.
Of course, it could be done over a network. So, but consequently, it's deemed a much more of a risk than it would have been if it couldn't been done over a network because it was a piece of software that was sat on your hard drives. So, the combination of all of these things, but the main one being that as long as my clients are managing their patches well, most of the clients who cannot be in that scenario are using some sort of virtual patching system. PatchStack being an example where you can use one, means that the instantaneous aspects of it isn't necessary. So I'm not necessarily. We're still being picking up and we're still being alerted whenever there is a vulnerability for a given plugin.
Mm.
So again, against all my client sites, I know if a individual plugin has a problem because I'll get a separated alert away from these big lists.
Yeah.
And from that, I can then do a proper risk analysis on it and decide whether or not it is. And that analysis will either be, okay, this isn't going to actually affect this client or any of my other clients, but it just becomes a warning and we bin it. Uh, and you'll be amazed how many times I will not even mention it to a client, even though it might be doing the rounds, and it might be doing the rounds and hitting the main news sources, and it will still be like, actually, this risk is so low that we've got the mitigations in place already. We've got the procedures in place to deal with this. We don't need to worry about it. Other times, I'll look at something and go, oh,
Yeah.
our pants. That's not patched. That's a problem for us. That particular scenario really affects this client here. We need to go deal with that. And that might be we'll turn off the plugin. That might mean we'll put in rules. We'll modify their WAF, or we'll do something. We'll apply our own patches. And for that, rather than quite often, if I'm applying a patch and I'm managing any part of that hosting, we'll use something called Snufflepagus, which is a PHP module that allows us to in real time virtual patch
Yep.
something without touching the code base, which is a really useful tool, but very, very dangerous. So if you don't know what you're doing, please don't install it because it can completely screw you up very quickly. But we'll maybe, if it's something like that, we can use Snufflepagus to change the way that the code works if we have to. But more often than not, we'll just put in a WAF rule to prevent what's going on. So with that in mind, these become fear-mongering tools.
Yeah, to some degree I agree. The other thing you have to look at, and what I would say to any other agency out there. So if you're a shop where you're doing a lot of new builds, what I would suggest is get a software stack. So if you use this contact form, use that contact form on all your sites. Use this, use this. And then if your stack is as customized as possible, as consistent as possible, then at least you know if you're dealing with this at A, you're dealing with this at B, and you're dealing with this at C. Where we see a lot of this stuff usually is with Elementor because of the way the code base runs. So what happens with Elementor is you get one plugin that's compromised, and because they all use the same base code base and APIs and backend stuff, we end up with 50 of them pretty well compromised. I'm exaggerating, but you get the idea, right? So I think didn't we see this a couple of years ago with Freemius? Didn't our friends over at Freemius have a problem and we had like 400 plugins impacted like in one day or something?
Yeah, but I mean the downside to the approach of having a stack and sticking to it is a really good approach for you, especially if you are a build shop.
Yep.
I have a client who they're close to 1,000 sites, all built on a very similar build, and that's fantastic. It makes it very efficient. They can operate well. Obviously, when they suddenly need to patch 1,000 sites very quickly, their deployment servers go in overtime. And so as long as you've got a good automation and a deployment pipeline, not a problem. If you're manually logging into every one of your 500, 1,000 sites to update, oh, this is going to feel horrible. And maybe all of a sudden you're there going, why did I use this form? Why didn't I spread the risk?
Yes.
And I guess there are pros and cons to that. But just as an example, I brought up the Solid AWP because we just mentioned it at the beginning, vulnerability report, and there appears to be about 10 Elementor-based add-ons in this. I mean, it's not, as you say, there was 486 vulnerabilities.
Give or takes, yeah.
Yeah. So they're not quite at 10%, but there are sort of like 5% of all the plugins being discovered with vulnerabilities that week happen to have the word Elementor in their title. Now, that's not Elementor, the main plugin, that's all the various add-ons and things for them, which I think also shows the dominance of Elementor and its ecosystem as well.
Yeah. I wasn't really picking on Elementor. It was just a good example because it happens, right? And we know that. You talked about using software firewalls. So we know PatchStack, there's WordFence, there's Securi, there's a couple others. Do you have a preference?
None of them.
Okay.
I mean, so having WordPress implement itself, a firewall inside the WordPress core itself is not ideal because things shouldn't defend themselves where possible. You really want this out to a dedicated application. Most of the time, if I'm configuring and managing things for a client, I will use a separated WAF, and that's a completely separated WAF appliance. Now, that ultimately is a Linux box running a dedicated WAF software, and then that passes back through. Sometimes we will use PatchStack virtual patching solution, especially for clients who maybe don't have a very large budget. PatchStack or where, especially if we have clients with very large budgets, legacy software stacks that we cannot bring into a good routine for maintenance and automation
Yep.
towards updates. The sort of one where you wish them well, put them on patch tag, throw them in the corner, and go, please don't come back to us. La 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 la. We don't know about you. Isolated as far away from the rest of the world as possible. But generally, it really does depend on what the end client's using. That could be something like ModSec security. For my own personal stuff, I have for a couple of years now not used either Apache or Nginx, and so I have been using something called Caddy as my HTTP server. And Caddy has some amazing WAF security options. So I use a Caddy module for all of my own personal stuff. But for clients, if we're going down the Nginx route, or indeed going down Apache, I tend to use a centralized appliance which will have ModSec on it. ModSec's old and gets a lot of stick because it can be a bit slow, but it's pretty efficient. The problem people always seem to have is that they don't know how to use it properly, and they will rely on third-party rules from. I seem to be on taking a grind at people, but a good example is within Plesk, you've got things like Immunify 360 and its rules, and they are trash.
Yeah,
They are
they're
just
awful.
you will just block your users, and it's like, what did you do? You tried to use the website. How dare you? So there's but you can find really good rule sets, and over time, I think every sysadmin, and particularly if you're a security side of things, you start customizing your own rule sets, and these become your like little babies that you carry around and you take from client to client. And so I have my own customized rule set that is very much focused around what I think is important. And yeah, it works really well. The only thing it can't do is because it hit the WAF is meant as a shield. It's the thing you throw in last. You want everything to be solid behind you,
Mhm.
and everything and all it to be up to date, and there to be no major problems. And then the WAF is the thing you throw in front of it as either an emergency because you haven't got time to fix something, or as a, oh no, we didn't notice that, so we're just going to have this shield that we're going to fling in front of us. Consequently, more often than not, if it's a WAF that's not part of like the WordPress stack, it can't get the feedback from the WordPress stack. So it doesn't actually know what the user was trying to do.
Yeah.
It just can see the URL and the payload, and it has to guess. So you do get false positives using them, and it's not as intuitive, but it does stop an awful lot of the basic attacks. Mind you, simply having your site up to date will stop even more. So
We we've talked about that in
yeah,
past shows. And the other thing we really I gotta stress here, small business owners, they always say, nobody's gonna attack me because I'm small. And I would argue, yes, they're gonna attack you because small business owners, unless they pay somebody like Tim or pay somebody like me, they probably don't keep their site up to date. So they become even a bigger target sometimes than big sites. Because what these attackers do is they go after small compromised sites and use small compromised sites to attack bigger sites, right?
well, it's not even about size of the site. They'll whenever a vulnerability comes out, someone will come out.
Yeah.
We're going to pick on Elementor today because
Oh,
clearly
because
that
we can.
I've got them in my head now. So let's say there's a vulnerability in Elementor, which has happened, but is generally, we don't want massive plugins like Elementor to have vulnerabilities that can easily be exploited. But let's say that for the sake of argument, and there really isn't, but let's say for the sake of argument, Elementor announces a big vulnerability that allows an unprivileged user, so that's someone who's not logged in, to be able to manipulate the URL of a website and get themselves to be able to change the options, WP options
Oh,
table.
great.
A vulnerability that's definitely happened many, many times over the years.
Yes.
But we'll go and say this is with Elementor. Well, what will happen next is someone will take that code and turn that into an exploitable piece of code that can be then added into scrapers and hacking tools, and they'll sell that. They won't bother doing it themselves. They'll just sell it on. And then script kiddies. So these are and when we say script kiddies, we're not talking about actual kids. We're just talking about the next person, next line in the chain. It's a big business. A corporation somewhere will now buy that, and then they will load it into their tools, and their tools will go along and they'll just go from website to website to website looking to see if that vulnerability works. They just, and it's not quite phone directory level, but it is almost start at A, work our way down till we find one that works. And you can watch this if you manage a server where you might have multiple sites, you can watch as it hops from site to site to site. And as you do, you'll see that they make the same exploits, the same attacks, and they'll keep going through. They'll rotate their IPs. Once they've got onto one, they'll start up their tools on that site, and that site will then start looking for the vulnerabilities on other sites, and so on until it grows and grows the network out. And so a vulnerability affecting something like Elemental, which would be millions of sites, can be suddenly have taken control over lots of sites very, very quickly. But it's not the size of your site that it cares about. You could be a £1 million site. If that vulnerability was on that site, it will still get infected. Because the big thing for all small businesses to take away is no one's hacking you. There isn't like a person sitting there going, I'm going to hack Rob's site.
Yeah.
It's not like that. It's a bot, and it's just processing through a list. You are an item on a list. And it's not you, or not even you. An IP address and a domain name is an item on a list. And that's all your site is to them. And once your site is compromised, all it is then is a resource. And about how much can we exploit this resource. The only saving grace you might have as a small business is that you might be on really bad shared hosting, and you're not worth very much in terms of resources because your email's blocking your server provider is probably blocking your email. And ironically, the cheaper the hosting, normally the more nasty the WAF, because they're used to being compromised and they don't want their servers compromised because there will be hundreds, if not thousands, of sites on them. So yeah, I don't know what you can take from that other than if you're going to be cheap, be really cheap.
Yeah. And it's funny because most of us tell our clients to stay away from cheap hosting for other reasons.
Oh yeah, no, I mean obviously from any other perspective, that is rubbish. And the thing about a cheap hosting is that cheap hosting you get exactly what you pay for. And if you are hacked on a cheap host, that cheap host is not going to help you. They're going to lock your site down, and then they're going to say, hey, give us $500 and we'll clean up the hack. And what that really means is they'll just delete your WordPress install and then hand you back a broken site and say, there you go, I did it. So it really isn't worth buying cheap hosting. But the other side of that is the irony that the cheaper the host, normally the better the WAF they've got installed, because they care about their infrastructure far more than they care about their customers.
And that's saying a lot, but that's, another story. So at the end of the day, you're not a big, and I kind of agree with you. You got to be careful what you run with inside WordPress. And that's why you go that route. And the other thing we know that doesn't work well is malware scanners with inside WordPress. I think that's the biggest mistake going, because why would you scan inside the infected or possibly infected area? Like, that doesn't make any sense either, does it?
No, I mean, we picked on Elemental. Let's pick on WordFence for a minute,
I like that idea.
Just for the sake of it. So, I think it's a testament to WordFence's ubiquity. Anyway, to how many sites have WordFence installed that malware now is written to turn off WordFence.
Yep,
and it makes sense. I'm a bad actor. I arrive on your site. I look and see WordFence. What do? I turn off WordFence. I disable its access to its rules. I delete myself from the logs. I am not there anymore. If that is your line of defense, and I have control of the line of defense,
Your
I'll
SOL.
just turn it off.
Yeah.
Now you don't have one. And all of the plugins that do similar things have exactly the same problem. It's in a similar vein, people who use backup plugins to back up WordPress. And you're like, but what if that, apart from the whole resource usage, that the backup plugin will be making that request from the web server, and the web server is almost certainly going to run out of resources at some point, and the memory limits and all that stuff. Just the more practical thing of something backing up itself,
Yeah.
if you think about it for more than 2 seconds, doesn't sound like a good idea. So that's why you would use a third-party backup tool, your own backup, whether that's a shell script, whether that's a third-party service or something. In a similar way, you don't want to have your security being done inside WordPress, because anything that has breached it, and of course, WordFence is a good example where they have like a WAF that interacts. And in theory, you can like have the WAF act first. You can pre-append their URL. Very rarely do I see that implemented. And one of the big problems WordFence has is WordFence is installed in vast majority of places and not configured properly.
Yeah.
But then down to that, their documentation is appalling. So I don't blame anybody, because most people install it, activate it, and think I've done. Well, it's like, well, you haven't. You've done nothing.
Yeah.
And occasionally they'll get a scan saying, "Oh, you're clean."
Most people do the plugin and push the activate the plugin button, and away they go, right? And
My favorite one was a client who told me they had WordFence installed, and they did. They just didn't have it activated.
oh, great.
Like,
That's even better.
but they installed it. They were right. They installed it. It just wasn't active. But even if you do have it activated, you need to go through the steps if you are going to use their WAF. And I'm never going to say don't use something that's there, because I don't want to be the person who said turn off your security plugin and then you get hacked. But if you are going to use WordFence, you do need to do a couple of things. One of which is look at doing the pre-append. Now you can do that either in your htaccess if you're on Apache, or if you're using Nginx with PHP FPM, you can add that to your PHP FPM pull config. And it's basically, you can then call to waf.php, which would be in the root of your site, and that can then be used to before any action, any PHP script runs, that file will run first, and that will trigger their WAF rules, which is useful. Couple of things to bear in mind: when WordFence scans all its files, would you like to have a guess at which file it doesn't scan?
PHP.
The waf.php file.
We've
Because it's the one it can't do, because it's part of that waf.php. There's like a bit above it that says, please add whatever configs or things you need to have running before we run here. So if you put your malware in the waf file, it won't get detected.
oh, wonderful.
But the other thing that most people don't
Nobody's listening. By the way, nobody's listening to this show, right?
yeah, it's fine. The other thing to bear in mind is that WordFence releases their free rules like every 14 days.
Yes, they do.
Horse has already bolted well at that. We're when we're talking about infections and we're talking about these lists, we're seeing the time for exploitation. So the time between someone saying there's a vulnerability and it being actually exploited is being reduced. And
yep. No question.
We're not talking 14 days anymore. We're talking
like hours.
Yeah, for a big vulnerability, certainly hours. So let's go back to our fake Elementor vulnerability that gets launched. It gets announced, pushed onto WordFence. The update's been done, and then you're still going to get infected, even though you had WordFence installed, because you don't have the current rule set. If you're going to go down the WordFence route, it's a bit like paying your Apple tax. You do have to pay for the upgrade to the premium version if that's the route you want to go. At which point, if you're paying for this, and I think it's worth emphasizing, people probably should be paying for some sort of security.
Yep.
I don't think it. Now that could be through your managed host. That could be through your development partner. Yes. But somewhere along the line, you should be paying somebody to look after your security. And once you're looking at the sort of like the WordFence premium options and their response bits and pieces, this it suddenly opens up a more wider conversation of, do I want to be with this people? Do I want to be with Patch Stack? Do I want to go to Solid WP? Do I want to go to somebody like me, somebody like yourself?
Yeah.
Um,
What I should also tell you, Solid WP's backend is patch stacks. I don't know if
yes, yeah.
people know that or don't know that, but it's worth mentioning. Yeah.
And Patch Stack's got some really good integrations now with a bunch of people.
Yeah.
They turn up in, I think, quite a few of the managed hosts are now using patch stack, and certainly using patch stack to get the vulnerabilities, not necessarily from the virtual patching. Solid WP's firewall is actually just the virtual patching from patch stack. I think, I don't think
Yeah,
it
it
does
is.
anything else anymore.
It is.
It used to be something slightly different, so, but I think they moved over relatively recently.
Yeah. Um, so that kind of covers it off, I think. I think we've kind of given some people some hints and said, like, and really security comes down to who do you trust, right? We all know that. And 480, I can look at lists like that and say, yeah, but I'm not using most of this stuff because I don't trust all these people anyway, so it don't matter. So we need to stop looking at always the big numbers and kind of drill it down and say, really, is this impacting me or is it not, kind of thing.
I mean, there are 486 plugins on this list.
Yep.
I am quite a long way, albeit still in the C's, which but I've yet to find one that I actually know. And I see, oh, some of the contact form 7
What
some
else? What
plugins.
else is new, by the way?
But yeah, and there was. It's important to emphasize that plugins have vulnerabilities for a range of reasons. Any plugin can be caught out.
Yep.
We've all written really crap code over in our lives. We will all continue to write really bad code. Some people
Yep.
will do it through just not knowing better, and some people will do it out of sheer laziness.
Yep.
The other thing we didn't mention in our big thing through was that we're going to see a lot more increase as people start to realize that they can use tooling, not necessarily directly AI, but they are going to start realizing, hey, I can actually use automated tooling to find these vulnerabilities and
Yes.
report them. And as we've become more mature in the way we handle security as a community, and you have got these bug bounty schemes going by people like Patchstack, by people like WordFence, you are going to see this low hanging fruit appearing an awful lot. So I wouldn't be terrified at big numbers. I
Yeah.
would
And I
encourage
would,
people to look at them though.
I wouldn't be either. And a good example, if we go to the personal computing side, is Windows. Microsoft patches vulnerabilities the first Tuesday of every month on Patch Tuesday. And they've done this for years. And we know their cycle. And we know that if something really key comes up, they'll issue that patch right away. And you don't see the business world going away from Windows, yet vulnerabilities are found every month and every day, right? So I think
Yeah.
we
I
have to
mean,
be in that mindset.
it is whether it's apocryphal or not. There is the tale that I always loved was this idea that Patch Tuesdays happens and vulnerabilities come out on a Wednesday.
Yep, it's true. Exactly the point. Because the minute they're disclosed and you're not patched, away we go. Yeah,
Yeah,
no question. Tim, do you have any workshops or anything coming up worth talking about?
I don't at the moment. My the start of this year has not gone quite as according to my plan as it's going to be, but I am in the process. I did a user security workshop last year,
Yep.
and I'm in the process of turning that into a much larger course,
Oh,
um, which will be launched into the future. I was hoping to get it launched in the Q1, probably looking at Q2 now. But if people are interested in learning more about the user security side of WordPress, then if they go on my site, so timnash.co.uk, go to the bottom or click newsletter at the top, sign up to my newsletter, and when I am ready, I will shout it from the rooftops.
I'm sure you will. And we'll shout it here too. Tim, thanks so much. Have yourself a wonderful day as always.
And to you too.
Thank you. This podcast has been brought to you by Stunning Digital Marketing, your digital marketing concierge to help the business owner put all his pieces together, whether it's email marketing, WordPress security, WordPress design and development, PPC, and more. Text Stunning Digital Marketing for all your digital marketing needs today. A very special thank you to Tim Nash for joining me on this edition of the SDM Show. The SDM Show is dedicated to my late father, Bruce Cairns. Dad, I miss you very much every day. My mother, Ann Cairns, who's still doing really well and is an inspiration. And of course, Tiz Maroney. And Tiz, I know I've said it, but thank you so much for all the inspiration you give me every day.